In a region pulsating with innovation and opportunity, we embarked on a journey to hear directly from the visionaries, shaping Latin America's economic and societal landscape, each offering unique insights into the critical role of business in fostering economic mobility and equity.
So I'm Gaston Bottazzini. I'm CEO of Falabella for the last 5 years. I was born in Argentina, but have been living in Chile for the last 15 years. Just to give you some background on Falabella, it's a very old company, 135 years old. We operate in retail through several formats, in financial services, mostly through personal banking, and in commercial real estate through shopping malls. We operate in 7 countries in the region. Our main countries are Chile, Peru, and Colombia, but we also have operations in Mexico, which is our newest operation, also in Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina.
So we want to talk about the role of business in addressing economic inequality. So we'd love to know the role that your company plays in addressing economic inequality. Please give us a high-level overview.
So for us, it's extremely important as a company, and we have increasingly taken action around how to be more inclusive, how to fight inequality. And we do it in 3 fronts: the customer, our team, and the communities in which we operate. The customer, in my opinion, is the most important front because it's really what you do and how you present yourself as a company to the public. And given how diverse we are, the way we address that is very different by business. But for example, and just to give you some examples, in financial services, we are probably one of the companies in the countries in which we operate that has a more proactive financial inclusion program, both from the point of view of giving people products, but as importantly, from the point of view of promoting financial education from schools where we collaborate with financial education throughout the financial life of a person. Interestingly enough, in our countries, people graduate sometimes even from university with very low financial education. So giving financial products to people without that background could be counterproductive rather than promote financial inclusion. In retail, I think just to give an example, in the last few years, we have gone through an overhaul of the type of clothing we design in Colombia, for example, where we went from designing clothing for a stereotyped body to really learning what the different Colombian personas look like and like to dress like, and therefore change in the back how we design clothing. So that's an example, I think, that is very important, that companies have to adapt to the consumers, and in particular, not only in terms of design, but also in terms of the cost of the product so that consumers can actually afford from a very early stage different products. In our home improvement business, for example, we work a lot with reskilling because that's a business that lends itself very much for reskilling, and therefore that's the main focus. When we turn towards our own team, I think that's a very big challenge in Latin America. We're a 100,000 people team with all kinds of backgrounds and socioeconomic levels. And I think one of the challenges we face, for example, is reskilling. How do we manage the fact that we are, as companies, transform the skills necessary, change, and you want to go through that process without necessarily changing the team, but having the team adapt. And as a result of that, we have taken on a lot of reskilling initiatives. And I think the challenge there is how you make them scale. It's easy to find, a group of people that can turn from call center operators to, for example, working on UX issues on a web page. But how do you take that to the level where you actually help a large number of people go through that process? That's probably the main challenge we face. And then in terms of the communities, how do you translate what you do with your customer to the impact you have in the community at large? I think one example there is how we work with prisons in home improvement. where our team from Sodimac, and it's mostly done through volunteering, will go to prisons and teach skills that have to do with home improvement, which helps people that will have a very tough time reinserting in society in general, go through that process much easily because they're building some skills. And at the same time, they're getting some additional income in the short term for the families, etc.
That's amazing. Can we go back to reskilling a little bit more? Can you give us a couple of examples, maybe some color around what type of impact you're having, and maybe a couple of examples of how people are progressing in their careers?
Right. So I think the basic issue that we face, which I kind of prompted to, is the fact that our company, as most companies around the world, are transforming and are migrating from a more physical world to a hybrid world. In our case, our physical world remains extremely important, but we also have a very strong digital world that is the one that is growing the most. And as that happens, many of the jobs that you have in the physical world become obsolete. And we, for example, have very large call centers. We have a lot of cashiers, which if you go today to a supermarket or to a department store, you'll see most of the cashiers are being replaced by self-checkouts. All of those jobs are disappearing, and the jobs that are coming into the market are more skilled labor jobs. So there is a problem of growing unemployment with more unskilled labor and shortages in more skilled labor. So what we have to do as a response to that is try to help our own people, and sometimes even people outside the company, to build some of these skills. And we have a lot of examples of partnering, for example, with either non-for-profit organizations or some of the staff augmentation companies that do development or do UX to help devise programs that our people will join and therefore be able to move internally to other jobs or move to other jobs in other places. And we have been successful in doing that. But as I said before, the problem is the numbers, because the numbers are very large. And it's relatively easy to take 10, 20, 30 people and build skills and find another role in the company. It's harder to do that with thousands of people. And that's probably the challenge we face.
Okay, thank you. So if one of your peers said, what is the single most important initiative that you are taking to address economic inequality, what would you say that is? Would it be reskilling? Would it be something else?
I think given the size of our company and the number of customers we serve yearly about 38 million customers in the region. So anything we do with our customers in terms of inclusion, in terms of fighting inequality, is always going to be the highest impact. So even small decisions, and I think this is not only about initiatives, but it's also about becoming conscious that many of the decisions that you take day to day in the company, have an impact on economic inclusion, have an impact on inequality. So when you make the decision of whether you're going to distribute only to those places that are economically viable versus you're going to subsidize distribution to a place where it's probably not as economically viable, that's an economic inclusion and an equality kind of decision. When you decide how you're going to hire, whether you're going to put a very heavy weight on credentials versus try to make your hiring process as credential blind as possible, that's also has a very big impact. But again, I think we make decisions vis-a-vis our clients every day. And if you have a team that is conscious that those decisions not only have an economic impact, but they also have an impact on society and are able to, prioritize that correctly, that's probably the most important.
Is this good for business? Very high level.
Well, I think it depends on how business people look at the equation, because many of these things are not good for business in the sense of being profitable in the short term. And you need to be ready to sacrifice that. I think there is a little bit of a fallacy of thinking that, economic inclusion and fighting inequality is very good for business, And there's always initiatives that are good for business, but you have to go beyond that. And I think if you take the perspective that what you're building is long-term value rather than short-term economic results, then you're building a lot more customer loyalty over time. You are building a team that has a higher purpose, and therefore will have more commitment and will be willing to go further, probably lower employee turnover as well. So if you look at those indicators of how you are building longer term equity, I think it's very good for business.
Tackling economic inequality is very hard work. So what would be your piece of advice for someone who wants to make a difference and really isn't sure how to proceed?
I would say my piece of advice is to take a two-pronged approach. Devise initiatives that you think will have the highest impact, whether it is on customers, your team, community, but work very hard on the culture and the decision-making culture, and that will probably be will have more impact over time. Probably you will not be able to, highlight a single initiative, but you will have impact across all of these fronts over time, given the day-to-day decisions that you're making.
And because we're Harvard Business School, we are curious, what do you think that the role of business education is right now for this issue specifically?
Well, I think in general, we need business leaders to be more conscious of the impact of their decisions. And I think particularly in the last few years, there has been an erosion of the trust between business leaders, communications leaders, and government. And the only way to repair that is that business leaders start thinking more consciously about the impact of their decisions and how they interact with all of these stakeholders so that they start to build trust again.
Okay, and the role of business schools?
And I think business schools are the ones that are shaping how these business leaders think, and therefore have a very important role in, I think in particular, the initiative that Harvard Business School is taking right now about really highlighting the importance of inclusion and inequality is no doubt a very important role.
In 2024 and beyond, the next couple of years, what trends or challenges would you think other business leaders should contemplate for this issue?
Yes, I think there's a context today in the region also of a macroeconomic context of higher inflation, of lower growth in many of the countries. And I think businesses are going to be pressured, our business is pressured for short-term results. So I think there's going to be an increased level of consciousness necessary in how people make decisions about how you adapt to these different contexts, variables, and at the same time keep inclusion and inequality forefront.